Alrighty, it is about time, so let's get started. Hello and welcome to today's PETA webinar. This is free and exclusive for our members. My name is Cassie Tung. I'm the Head of Marketing and Communications here at PETA, and I am so pleased to be spending the next 45 minutes with all of you. Before we begin, let's take a moment to shift out of the mode of our busy day and make some space in our brain to gain some new insights. A really good way to get grounded for this is to think about the literal ground beneath our feet, I've found. And then I think it's so easy from there to think about gratitude and respect for that earth, that place that holds us up, this country that we live and work on. I'm hosting this webinar from home on Gadigal land in the heart of what we now call Sydney, which is just absolutely beautiful country. And I want to pay my respects to the traditional custodians of this land, the elders past and present. I feel really lucky to live on this land where sovereignty was never ceded. It always was and always will be Aboriginal land. And I hope that as you're thinking about where you're on and paying those respects to, that's really helping you to sort of settle in and get ready for what is about to happen. Quick bit of housekeeping. This webinar is being recorded, so we do ask that you stay on mute so everyone can hear our speakers when they watch the recording back. However, we'd still love to hear from you, so share questions and comments anytime in the Zoom chat. I'll be keeping an eye on that, and so will Eileen, our Head of Membership, and we'll make sure that any of your questions are answered. Today, we are going to take a deep dive into grammar and meaning, one of the most popular and powerful reference texts for teachers. We released a new edition in November last year. If your membership includes books, you would have received a hard copy or ebook copy then, depending on what you've chosen through your membership. If you haven't received it, you can reach out to info@peta.edu.au and we'll chase that up. You can also message Eileen Tang in the chat at any point and she can help you out with that. We also do bulk discounts if you'd like to have several staff members at your school with a copy. We know that this is a real workbook of a text, and sometimes it's really handy for everyone to have a copy. So if you're interested in a quote for that, email info@peta.edu.au or hit up Eileen in the chat, who I think has just messaged everyone now. Excellent. All right, I am delighted to introduce you to the co-authors of this new edition of Grammar and Meaning, Sally Humphrey and Susan Feez. They're going to take you through everything new in this edition and, very importantly, how we can take the info from this book and bring it into the classroom and school for planning to transform, strengthen and support grammar instruction in primary classrooms. Welcome, Sally and Susan, and over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Cassie. And it's just to follow on from Cassie, I'm talking to you from the Sunshine Coast, which is the traditional lands of the Gubbi Gubbi people, and I pay my respects to their elders, past, present and emerging. And it's a great privilege to be talking to you all about the new edition of Grammar and Meaning. And of course, Sally and I really hope this is going to be a great addition to your teaching repertoire and your professional library, and really helps you into the work that you're doing, the very important work that you're all doing in schools. So we're going to talk, we've got 3 parts to our talk today, our little presentation about the new edition of Grammar and Meaning. I'm going to begin by talking about the knowledge about language terrain. We're going to map the terrain with a very familiar language map, a map I'm sure you've all seen in different versions around the place. And then we'll begin to talk about what's different about edition 3. And Sally will pick up that theme in parts 2 and 3. So here's our language map. And we'll just start by, as you can see from the title, it's grammar and meaning.
Sorry, so Susan, the slides aren't shared.
The slides aren't shared?
Sorry about that.
Okay, so Cassie, could you help us there if the slides aren't shared according to
I can see them just fine. I can see your language map right now.
Can you?
Yeah.
What about everybody else?
I can see it okay. It's all good.
Oh,
I can
only
see
just me. Isn't that amazing? What is it about me? I will shut up and let you get on with it. Thank you.
Well, we'll see and see if
I've got my own to look at. Thanks.
Yeah, okay. So so I'll start off with the language map so you can see where both grammar and meaning are located on the map and what that might mean for current approaches to the teaching of language and literacy. So here is grammar on the map, and for many of you this will be a very familiar map. We can see that grammar is located next to expression. This is an area where we've had a lot of focus in recent years on the teaching of alphabetic knowledge, sound letter knowledge, and also of spelling. But what we will argue is that word recognition includes, very importantly, sound letter and alphabetic knowledge, but also knowledge about the other parts, many of the parts of grammar. And this boundary here, we'll talk about it if we answer the question, what is grammar? We can see where the expression moves on into grammar. So grammar organizes morphemes into words. Morphemes are the smallest units of grammar. Words into groups and phrases, and groups and phrases into clauses. Clauses are combined to create texts. Here's our layer of text, and of course, texts involve creating sentences and paragraphs. These are the parts of written text. And over here, we can see the layers of meaning are grammar and text. And this is where meaning is shaped, of course, by context, but this is where meaning is made. And that's where, so it's hurrying along, for some reason, my slides aren't waiting for me today. But we can see here that these are the layers of meaning. This is the focus of this particular book, is in these areas of grammar and text, and also here on this boundary between expression and grammar, which is the area of vocabulary building or morphemes. We're not going to be able to talk much about that boundary today, but in chapter 1, we've included a new section on vocabulary building, which I hope you'll find useful. So if we're going to talk about meaning, we need a way of talking about meaning. And we've created here we've set this up using the metaphor of a toolkit, as it was in the previous edition. And of course, that toolkit includes a metalanguage to talk about meaning. And you can see our toolkit is organized into 4 meaning systems, and they align, of course, with the Australian Curriculum English. And each system of meaning is represented by a drawer in the toolkit and a chapter in the book. For many of you will realise and have seen in the previous edition that our book refers to Bev Derevianka's New Grammar Companion for Teachers, in this case, the 3rd edition, to match our 3rd edition. So Bev's book is the reference text and our book is the workbook. And you'll find in this book lots of activities, grammar summaries and exercises to help you practice and to explore the knowledge that's covered in the book and that's initially presented in Bev's Grammar Companion. So here we've got the layers of language, our language map, and you can see here the different layers, and these are the chapters and appendices related to each layer. So most of the work, of course, is in chapters 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, all about grammar, and appendices 4 and 5, which provide you with some extra information summarised in these appendices to extend the knowledge that we've included in the chapters. Chapters 1 and 5 also, of course, refer to text because chapter 5 is about organising text. So that's where we start putting the grammar together to create texts. We talk about register in chapters 1 and in chapter 3. And then we cover some material on genre. You'll be familiar with Appendix 1, where we provide examples of text types for learning. And in Appendix 2, we show how that are distributed across the learning areas. So how does this align in combination with some other resources you might be able to find? Here I've just put Phonics International because that's where you can get free resources for teaching sound letter knowledge. So that, of course, also goes on in your classroom, but of course, many of you will be using quite a variety of resources for that work. Peter has also in the past developed a book about the alphabetic principle. A very useful book about spelling is the 2nd edition of Misty Donohue's book. And of course, Nolene McKenzie talks a lot about handwriting. And I believe there's a Peter workshop that she runs all about handwriting and keyboarding, which is important parts of the expression level of language. But when we get up to grammar, of course, we've got Bev's book, Grammar and Text. And the EALD handbook looks at some of these areas of knowledge about language in relation to teaching students who are learning English as an additional language. And if you're interested, and you'll see in our book, we do include image as a way into knowledge about language. But in this book by John Callow, The Shape of Text to Come, that idea is extended much further in much more detail. And of course, when we're talking about text types at the level of genre, there is Bev's Exploring How Texts Work, the anniversary edition, and Sally and Emma Vale's book about investigating model texts for learning. So you can see a lot of overlap between what we do, and these books all work together to help you with your language and literacy programming and planning. They all are very complementary areas of work that you can draw on, jumping from one to the other to just to expand what you're doing or reinforce what you're doing in the classroom. So what's new about knowledge about language in the 3rd edition? So chapter 1 particularly, we've done a little bit more work on about recognizing key grammatical forms. So we talk about the difference between form and function and make that difference much clearer. We'll see, you'll see that as we continue our talk, how we've done that. And we've also then expanded knowledge about forms and their functions in the appendices to give you a little bit more information that would have been fogging everything up if we'd included it in the early chapters. But I hope you find those useful reference resources. And in particular, in chapter 1 and in the appendices, we're trying to sort out people's prior knowledge of the verb. The verb is at the heart of the clause. The clause is the unit of grammar. So coming to grips with verbs, and we've put here a lot of the meta-language that surrounds the verb and the various forms of the verb. It's complicated. So I hope we've been able to weave this together in a way that makes some kind of picture that makes sense to everybody, or certainly as a reference you can go back to in the grammar summaries, the exercises, and the appendices in the book. So for example, looking at verb groups, we start at the top where we think about the function of a verb group to set up the process in a clause. And of course, processes can either be happenings, actions, sayings, or sensing, thinking, feeling, perceiving, or states relating, different kinds of relating verbs. So that's when we think about the verb from the top down and verb groups and the work that they do, their function. And we think about also from the point of view of the work that verb groups are doing, the work of phrasal verbs and some of the secondary verbs that we use in, and you'll see what these mean in chapter 2, and Sally will probably cover some of this, as well as the point of view. So when you use create a verb group, use a verb group in a clause, then you're telling the listener or the reader what's your point of view from the point of view of time, but also from the point of view of probability or obligation, some kind of modality. And we cover that in chapter 4, as well as in chapter 1 and in these appendices. But we can also look at verbs and verb groups from the word level in terms of the form. What forms of the verb do we use for all these different functions? So we look at main verbs and other parts of the verb group from the point of view of the form. What forms we do use for particular tenses or particular secondary verbs and phrasal verbs. Forms for tense and voice, the auxiliary verbs, regular and irregular verbs, finite verbs and their subjects. So this is probably, we've expanded what we've done here quite a lot in this new edition. And we hope that that's useful, because without becoming to grips with the verb at the heart of the clause, grammar can seem a little bit overwhelming. It also gives you a lot of power as a speaker or a writer to use the verb group and form process and express meaning through processes in much more complicated and sophisticated ways for students as they move through the school years. So very valuable knowledge. So here are some word level forms with the forms of the verb. So we've got here many verbs include a comment adverb beside them, probably. There's a modality of probability. Should have organized. We've got 2 auxiliary verbs there, one expressing modality, one expressing tense. The main verb is the process I probably should have organized my desk. So understanding how to unpack that verb group and the surrounding words is a very valuable skill. And also as a writer, how to express these very fine-grained differences of meanings that you can make if you have knowledge of these different verb forms. And we've also, as you notice in the book, and we've been able to do in this edition, use color coding. So we've got green as to represent the verb group, which has been a great asset as we were writing the book in this new edition. And here we can see the grammar summary that you will be able to see in the book that shows us what the verb group is made up of, what it can have as well, and how we can even interrupt verb groups with other word classes, other classes of words like pronouns and nouns and other words or phrases. So I hope these kinds of eyefuls, as I think, Sally, you call them, so you can see all the knowledge that we sort of need in one bit like this. And you can use it as a reference text then as a reference so that that helps you with the exercise that might follow. So here's identifying the main verb in verb groups. So in this particular exercise, you can see the verb groups are highlighted in green, and you're asked to box the main verb and underline the auxiliary and secondary verbs. The box has not gone on here as I hoped it would, but of course logged would be in a box and have is the auxiliary verb. So this will, these are just exercises, and all of the answers, as in the previous edition, are all in the back of the book for you. So try them, have a go, then look at the answers. And again, here's a grammar summary of finite and non-finite verbs. So recognizing the finite verb in modality, the finite verb in simple tenses, the finite verb in complex tenses, the finite verb in passive voice, and non-finite verbs. Everything you need in one table. And here is an exercise that you go back to that grammar summary to try this exercise where you underline the finite verb, and then for each finite verb identify whether it's a main or auxiliary verb and whether it expresses tense and or modality. So I'm going to hand over now to Sally, who's going to talk much more about the new way that the chapters are organised.
Hello. That was fantastic. Thank you very much, Susan. I still haven't got the slides on my, I mean, I can't see the slides, but I've got a copy of the slides open, and I'm just hoping that we're going to be on the same one. So I'm moving now to the slide that says revised organisation within chapters. So
all right, I'll just try and follow your
yeah, that's right. That's right. It should be fairly common sense. There's not much here. Look, this is a huge difference in the book from the other two editions, and it's about kind of the applications for, you know, what does this look like in terms of my literacy practice? And we had lots of examples of, you know, we in the last edition we started with kind of like clause level practices, and then we moved up to look at what does this look like in different texts, and then looking even further along and what does it look like in different contexts, texts in different contexts, like subject areas and things like that. So each chapter had all of the application kind of work. We had kind of, you know, attention to the classroom implications. But what we noticed is that there wasn't really a lot of sequences of lessons that you might have a text that's taken out of a sequence of, you know, modeling lessons or, you know, lessons on introducing a new text type, you know, or a new kind of subject area knowledge with literacy. And we wanted to show what this knowledge of language might look like in that sort of sequencing. And also we realized that there wasn't a whole lot for the early years, because we were trying to kind of demonstrate all of these toolkits, you know, all of these tools of grammar. We tended to choose texts that had a lot of variety and a lot of, you know, a big toolkit, you know, or that needed a big toolkit. And we feel that the teachers of early years students were left without a lot of examples, I think. So what we've done this time, and it does kind of add a level of complexity, and don't worry, Susan and I really found it very complex to do this. But each chapter of 2, 3, 4, and 5, so each one deals with a different language system, we divide it into 3 sections. Now, the first section is a shared section, and it's like, here's your toolkit that you need, or here are your tools you need for across F to 6 for this particular meaning system. There are still exercises, but they tend to be the sentence level exercises that we've taken up. We have got some whole texts as well, but it's kind of, practice at a small scale in order to be able to sort of, okay, I know what this particular grammar feature is, and I know how it works in a very kind of contained schedule. All the grammar summaries are there that bring it all together as we go through that those different features. And then the second section of each chapter, chapter 2, for example, focuses on exemplifying and applying this in the context of texts taken from F to 3. Now, when we say early years, we're dragging it up to year 3 for 2 reasons. One, teachers need to kind of have more knowledge than, just the year that they're, the grade that they might be teaching. Teachers need to sort of be considering their year 2 students or their year 1 students from the point of what's being expanded beyond, those curriculum years. And also the curriculum packs a lot in to those years, and it's to put year 3 with year 4, 5, and 6 would make that a very heavy kind of end. So it kind of divides up nicely in terms of introducing the different ways. So in that section 1, building knowledge of the tools and practice using them. And in the sections 2 and 3, apply knowledge to explore meanings and classroom applications in whole texts, and importantly, lesson sequences. Now, we don't always use lesson sequences because sometimes it's, we just haven't got room to do that. But particularly in the early years ones, the F to 3, we try to kind of think about how this grammatical feature might be introduced in exercises that span a couple of lessons. Okay, so I hope you like that, because it comes out of real practice, things that we've done in the classroom or teachers that we've worked with have done in the classroom and have been tried and tested. So to illustrate that, here's section 1. So here's the building a meta language to share across years F to 6. This is to do with the happenings and state processes in images and language. Now, I don't think this has ever been done before, because I stumble all the time about trying to make connections between the meta language that we use to talk about images and the meta language we use to talk about language. And there's so many we've got the same theory of language underpinning both, the same social semiotic theory underpinning both. And I think it's really important to try to develop a kind of bridging meta language to span both the image and language ways of talking about it, as well as ways of talking about it in the curriculum in year 1, year 3, kind of, because it develops. So what we see here is that in looking at images, John Callow, for example, and other Kress and Van Leeuwen, who are sort of, the I don't want to say the fathers, but, the kind of, descriptors of image grammar, looking at dynamic or static, right, or narrative or conceptual. So these ways of talking about them that we can talk about happening processes as actions and reactions and interactions. We can talk about static or conceptual images in terms of the relationships they depict in terms of classifying, analyzing, or symbolic relations. And how do we then talk about language using, drawing on that meta-language? So we can talk about processes as happenings and states, as the curriculum does in year 1. And then in year 3, we're teasing out what do we mean by happenings. And many teachers do this earlier than year 3, of course, but there it is in the year 3 Australian curriculum of talking about the doing, feeling and thinking, saying processes. And we've also put, the more formal functional grammar terms that you might find in certainly Derianka and other textbooks that relate more to kind of the theoretical descriptions as well. So again, it's an eyeful, but it's bringing together this kind of how do we talk about, the processes that verbs kind of express in that. So putting it all there and then doing an exercise in terms of the images, thinking about the functions of language, the processes, the participants and circumstances, and then moving on to, okay, let's look at these state processes, if you like, static processes, relating processes, and think about the different jobs they do in terms of identifying, classifying, describing, simple matching exercises to do that. So this is all in that section 1 type of building my meta language to simple texts that maybe decontextualized from the actual teaching situation, but they give us an idea of the meta language there. And then when we get to the again, just going into that, that's all in chapter 1. When we get to section 2, though, we've changed gear. We're in a subject area, so we're looking particularly at, you might be integrating literacy and science, and we're looking at identifying visual and verbal grammatical patterns. So we're drawing on what we have introduced up here in order to look at particular images from a particular context. And here's the verbal text that goes with these images, and we're setting the exercise of color coding the participants, processes and circumstances, just as we did in the last book with the particular colors. And it is just wonderful that Peter allows color. It's just the most magical thing. I'm currently writing a book with American colleagues on grammar for the ESL curriculum, and not allowing color. It's like back to the dark days, So that's a beautiful, except for those who are colorblind. But it's a great resource to have color to be able to work with, and it's wonderful. So here are the exercises, all on the same topic within the same sequence. These are just sample activities, but we're still talking about this topic of, animals, within this science, living things unit of work. Lots of mapping out, using visual representations to graph the kind of relationships that might go on there. And then when we get to years 4 and 6, we come back to processes again. We really realize the importance of the verb and the work that it does. But this time we kind of think, well, we're getting into that kind of more precise meanings where it's within the context of how, we expand our meaning, potential, but we become more precise. And so we've got still the action verbs, sensing verbs, saying verbs, relating and existing verbs, but we've looked more particularly at the meanings you make. Now, on my screen, I can't see these. I've got to, either change to my proper reading glasses or whatever, but I'm hoping that you can see this is very much following Halliday. We didn't make this up, but we may have changed a few, words now and then to kind of make it a little bit more user-friendly in terms of the meta language. But we can see that, here I come. Yes, so that with oh, Susan, can you see any of those to read out? Because I honestly can't. You'd think I'd have checked the slides before I kind of put them at you, didn't I? But I'm going to ask you to trust me on that, that each of those is kind of divided into more precise meanings that we then, have texts that represent that precision. For example, mathematical rules. Okay, students need to apply maths rules to compute or work through a problem. Well, is that action? Is apply action? Or is it kind of like more? Chose the wrong example there. So all of those kind of verb types come from that table anyhow. That's what I'm asking you to think. For example, inside a pupa, they undergo metamorphosis. Well, are they doing anything? Or is that sort of done to, in that, is it a behavior rather than an action? That's the kind of expansion of meaning that we're trying to deal with in years 4 and 6. Obviously, things like nominalization and expanded noun groups to include the qualification after the main noun and the clauses and phrases happens more at the years 4 to 6. So that's the sort of what do I say? A kind of a snapshot view of the work that's happening there. There's also another kind of, it's not different really from the first couple of editions, but one thing we've been a little bit more conscious about is that this is a textbook for adults. It's a textbook for teachers who've already got a lot to bring to the exercises that we're giving. And so even though we're building on the teaching learning cycle of making sure that we're front loading our not just giving the exercises cold, but preparing teachers for them, we're leaving we're letting the teachers get stuck into the activity a little bit earlier. So I guess we're holding back from over teaching. Okay. And this is, look, I don't know whether I've got this funny diagram there that's got a whole lot of matchsticks on it. I don't know whether you at, but it's the detailed reading cycles in Reading to Learn that I've been inspired by in terms of having like a task-based sequence of exercise where the task is central and we prepare through the language, the grammar summaries and a little bit of orientation, but a lot of the work happens after the task has been attempted. So first thing that happens is that the answers are in the back of the book, okay? And the answers are generous in terms of, not just, one word. Sometimes we're really kind of making sure that we give an explanation of something that's being asked for. But then after that, after the exercise, when you've checked the answers and you might be thinking, oh, I don't understand why that was a ba and not a ba, we come back to the, sorry, this is just going through, we come back to the reflection. And here's where we say, kind of like, well, you might have noticed there was some challenges here, and we pick up on some things that might be, rather than teach all the exceptions before we let you do the exercise. It's sort of authentic that the exercise is not being controlled in any way that it sort of only has examples of this and that. We let it be realistic, but we illustrate some challenges in identifying participants and we step those out and do more teaching at that stage. So in my kind of experience with teaching adults and teaching people who already bring so much knowledge, it's kind of lets I think it lets the user be in a more powerful position or take more responsibility earlier, while continuing to support with the language summaries, with the actual explicit teaching and diagrams that we put in, the answers in the back of the book, and importantly, the reflections after the exercise. And then, of course, our application in the classroom of how you might, work with this in the classroom scene. So have I talked over time?
No, you're okay. If you want to make a few more points, we've got some time.
No, but I'd love to ask Susan if you'd like to kind of pick up on anything that I might have not been as explicit enough as I needed to be.
Well, I just was a bit worried that I wasn't quite going through the slides to match your talk.
Mm.
So I think maybe if people have any questions, because I mean, I was moving the slides along, but not always sure where to go with them. But if anybody's got any questions, recognizing that I did have to slip through some of those slides a bit quickly, if maybe you'd like us to go back over something, that would be fine. So maybe,
Oh, thank
Cassie,
you.
we
Yes,
can
I did.
hand over to you to facilitate questions that people like. I can see there are a lot in the chat. There's a lot of chat happening. So
Yeah,
I hand that over to you, Cassie.
Of course. Thank you so much. And thank you both for really going through how this book works and how people can use it in the classroom. It's really, really helpful. We have been busy in the chat making the links out that you have made through your presentation to all the different Peter resources, the books that you've referenced, and the fact that Grammar and Meaning and the New Grammar Companion work together really well. So we've just shared a couple of links in that regard.
That's what's there. Yep.
I can't see any actual questions in here. If anyone does have questions for Susan and Sally. Actually, we do have one from Annie, who is wanting to clarify that the questions / exercises in the books are for the teachers to do and not for the children to do.
It's a very, very good question, Annie. And a lot of the time, for example, especially in those, K to 3 times, we've taken them straight out of, that one that I showed you with the dolphin and the little boy, and the dolphin and those texts. They're straight out of a Year 2 unit that I did with teachers at Leichhardt Public School. And we use them over and over again, really, in the classroom as well. So even though they are being introduced here for the teachers, they're easily adaptable for the classroom. And I think that was not so obvious in the other editions. They were just text standing alone rather than, oh, well, hang on, you might do this and then do this and then do this in that way. Now, it's not always the case, but, there's a fuzzier line between whether the exercises are only for teachers. Obviously, the notes and the reflections are for teachers, that we wouldn't kind of, talk to students in the same language and perhaps not use as much technicality there. Would you like to add anything there, Susan, about what we've...
I think the technicality is interesting because I think what we've done with nearly all the technical terms are aligned with a particular question, a probe question that allows you to ask students to look at the language and to think about it. And I think even with the very youngest children in the foundation year, you can be using those probe questions even during their spoken language when you mightn't have anything written. But for that, children telling something, talking to the whole class about some experience they had, getting a bit tongue-tied, it's very useful. Say you want them to describe something, you might say, well, which one do you mean? Or what was it like? Or what was it doing? Or what was it the same as? All the sorts of words you can use that actually orient children to particular kinds of language that later on you might pick up and label with a technical term. But that's building the spoken language. We know that literacy, floats on a sea of talk. I think that was Barton or someone told us that. So we could actually use the probe questions and our knowledge about grammar right from the earliest development of language, even younger if you've got any experience in preschool settings.
I've just discovered that I could have clicked on Susan Fates' screen.
Right.
I'm really, really sorry if that really threw you. You've done a wonderful job, Susan, of getting through that. And I'm sorry to everybody else about whether or not, that you knew what slide we were on there.
You guys did a really fantastic job. So thank you so much. I'm just going to give everyone a second to, if they want to put another question in the chat, to do so. Actually, we've got one straight away. Will you be holding any further discussion sessions open to teachers to ask you clarifying discussion questions after they've had a chance to go through the book?
Well, I think that question's to Aileen and Cassie, isn't it? Rather than us, we just show up when we're invited. We're very good like that. You know, we love working with Peter and we love working with teachers. So Annie, I think that's an amazingly important point, though. That what really can you ask until you really engage with it and seeing what it can do in your situation, in your context. And just personally, and I tend to know that Susan feels the same way. We really, need that interaction and that engagement, and further discussion in order to be able to do the kind of work we do. So, yeah, we'll hold that space.
There's a lot to talk about as how to write this into programs where you're trying to put together all the elements of a literacy program. We've got those. You're worrying about fluency, you're worrying about comprehension, you're worrying about word recognition, all those different elements. I think grammar is a glue that can put all that together. But how do we do that? And I think you've sort of got to try, and when you've had a go, that's when the questions come up. So I'd be certainly very happy to have an opportunity to do that if that's something that Peter can set up, Cassie and Eileen.
Yeah, if you guys are happy to take sort of questions further on from the webinar, we can absolutely facilitate that. I'd also say that we know from some of our other members, we have a great webinar with Kerry Quee, who's used Peter texts in staff discussions to really generate that professional discussion within a staff team of working through a reference text and then seeing how they can apply that to their practice. So that can be a really helpful step as well. And another thing I guess I would say is if you have read through the book and you have further clarifying questions about grammar, about applying this grammar knowledge to classroom practice, that is what your association is here for. And since you're a member, you are in luck. We have hundreds of resources that can help you. So if you're going through and you're going, what next? What do I do with this information? Or I need clarity on this information, you can always contact the membership team at Peter and we can point you towards the readings, videos, past conference presentations. We have a lot of those back up on the website. We have more resources that come from this book and other texts by Sally and Susan, other things that we can point you towards to help you on that journey as well. So please don't hesitate to browse through your member portal, which is there with all your resources for you. Reach out to us with any questions. We can put you in touch with these experts or find other expert resources for you. Excellent. Some lovely thanks for you there in the chat, Susan and Sally.
Very much.
And I agree, this is absolutely a really useful look into this new edition. So thank you so much for walking us through these really critical changes, these differences, these updates, and for looking at these really practical applications for how the book can be used. It's really, really helpful and we really appreciate it. And thank you so much for spending your time with us and walking us through the book. We're really excited to have published it and to be connected with all of you this afternoon.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It's a lovely afternoon. Thank you so much, Susan, for your support there. That was great.
And to Sally, and really looking forward to hearing what teachers are able to do with this work, because I mean, I'm sure teachers will come up with things that we haven't even begun to think about, but using this book as a starting point.
Excellent. And thank you to all of our members for coming along or for watching the on-demand recording. We're really glad that you're here. Have a look at our upcoming webinars list to see what else you might want to attend. Hit up Eileen, our head of membership, at info@peter.edu.au if you're looking for copies of the book, bulk copies or more resources. The membership team is there to help you out. And I guess that the last thing to do is say thank you again to Susan and Sally, and thank you to all for attending. And we'll all hopefully catch up soon in the exciting world of grammar. Thank you.
Cassie, thank you, Eileen.